How many of you are pen testers here, or red teamers, or I know you are. Blue team. Anybody blue team? Anybody like defense? Cool. So what we wanted to do is a presentation about basically kind of what we do, and we'll talk about the kind of like the target audience here. So it's a little about me and Johnny. We're both offensive security leads at General Motors. I consider myself kind of a curmudgeon, if you know what that means. So we do like all kinds of different kinds of things at General Motors: pen testing, red teaming, and the like. There's our credentials and our Twitter handles if you want to follow us. So, but we like the people, we like the projects, and it's kind of fun. It keeps it challenging, and you guys have picked a career that really is going to keep you guys always learning and trying new stuff. And it's a very challenging career, especially for my old brain, but it's definitely rewarding. A little bit of our company. You want to address this, Johnny?
Yeah, sure. So this is just an overview of what, basically what our playground is, right? So, on the left is the General Motors, what they do. They're a car company at a high level. In the middle, so 180,000 people, 5 continents, 23 time zones, 70 languages. That's kind of our playground. We do red teaming across the entire globe. That's, physical, logical, like we mentioned, manufacturing, mobile, kind of everything that GM has, we are able to test, which is great. It's a big playground for us. Those time zones come into consideration when you're doing red teaming because, different time zones, you got to take into account when people are in the office, that sort of thing. Languages makes a difference. We've been on boxes where the language is not what we expected. And, we've got to adjust and figure out how to do, how to go from there. And then, of course, just what GM actually is. So like Chevy, GMC, Cadillacs, those are the brands.
Okay. Kind of our agenda for this talk. So if nothing here interests you, you can leave. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the differences between pen testing and red teaming, what kind of types of engagements we have, what are some of the skills that you need, both if you're building a red team or if you want to be part of a red team. Maybe you want to get into it. So career growth, non-technical versus technical skills, that sort of thing. What is red teaming? Some questions we have to answer. What kind of background knowledge is needed? What kind of skills do you need for red teaming? And how can you be an effective red teamer as possible? So one of the things I want to kind of bring out, and there's a lot of discussion in the industry. If you go to talks on red teaming and blue and pen testing, there's always talks about what's the difference between the two. We in the history have used these terms interchangeably sometimes. We've always called ourselves a red team even before we were doing actual red teaming. It's always been the title we've used. But really, and if you look at this, red teaming is a broader type of scope where the skill sets of pen testing is kind of involved in all that. So if you're a pen tester and you're proficient at your job, red teaming is not a huge leap for you. One thing I will say though, just on this too, you might not be as interested by red teaming as you think you might. Because what you're going to find is, if you like breaking things and testing things, you don't do quite as much of that on a traditional red team engagement. We'll get into that in a minute, but
it's more targeted, so it's maybe objective driven. Get this type of data and use any means necessary to get it. And whether you find all the vulnerabilities and exploit them along that chain doesn't really matter. We're more about the objective, getting that data, getting out, or identifying this particular thing, as opposed to the pen test side where we want to know all the vulnerabilities along the way that you got and exploited within that application.
So yeah, the skill set's very, very close to being the same, but the scope and the objectives are often very different. We try to emulate threats, right? So you hear about APT attacks and other things that happen, and we try to get as many details as possible on these types of attacks and try as much as we can to emulate them. Now that means not necessarily every little thing that they do, we do. Because for one thing, it's not necessarily useful to do it that way, and also we can't get a hold of the tools sometimes. Right? Some guy in Russia uses some tool he created to exploit something, and we don't have access to that. So, But we try to emulate the methods and the techniques that they use. Also, we're not as time boxed as a pen test. Pen test, they say you have 2 weeks to pen test this application. Well, sometimes our engagements can go months. You know, you just keep going basically. You recon, you do all these things to learn about the targets, like an attacker would. You know, the guy sitting in China or Russia, not to pick on countries, but you know, we get a lot of attacks from them. They're not like limited in time. They have, you know, if they want to spend years going after a target, they can. So we don't have years sometimes, but we're also looking for a prize, right? We're looking for some goal in our engagements, and usually it's data of some kind, right? So for Jim, it might be car plans of some sort. For Kentucky Fried Chicken, it might be the secret recipe. That would get you probably a lot of publicity for that one. We also work closely with defense. We're not like we honestly we've grown. And we used to be kind of competitive and more adversarial with the defense team, and we've learned that we're really kind of an extension of the defense team. We're like a tool of the defense team. So we work closely with them. It might include, an engagement might include, for example, physical testing, right? Social engineering. We'll get into some of those skills in a minute. It might include pen testing, which it usually does. It might include all kinds of skills that are in scope, possibly. Normally, we don't go in with like a scope. You're going to do this, this, and this, and not this. We usually say this might include this, this, and this, and this, but you know. And we have a very strict do no harm policy especially with our own company, right? We don't want to. We're not gonna chloroform anybody and kidnap them, and you know, even though an enemy might do that. So, but we don't do any harm. We try not to break anything. We try not to. Maybe some pride, I guess, maybe a little bit, but we try to do no harm. You've heard of black, gray, and white box testing, and that's often used of pen testing. Like, for example, when you know nothing about the environment, it's black box. It's almost never black box. Honestly, we know about the environment. So we go in with we try to keep it clean, though. We try to make sure we're not using, you know, something that an outsider couldn't get as information, right? Because that's kind of unfair, you know. But it's usually gray to white box. You have to add to that, or?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, you know, we really try to do, when we're doing black box, stick to that as much as possible. But we also recognize, you know, our own biases, that we've been there for so long. Some of that's already in our brain, and we have to kind of work against that. So when we are building these out and building out the reports, we always make sure we show the logic flow of how an outsider would get the information we used.
Yeah. If we find something internally, we can't speak to how we got the information from the outside. We don't use it. You know, because it's hard when you're doing your, you know, in-company red teaming, because you have to be very careful to keep it clean, because you're going to ask that. You're going to ask, well, how did you find this part of this flow out? How did you find this out? Like, oh, well, the guy sits next to me at work. Doesn't work. We do kinds of engagement. We do full scope external to internal, which means we start with like something like a phishing engagement. We start with there, or maybe, and I'll show you some engagement flows in a minute. But this is like the full, like, you know, and C-level executives love that, because they hear on the news about somebody getting phished, and all of a sudden they have access to their mail server and blah, blah, blah. They want to see that whole flow. But what we kind of focus more on are the assumed breach types of engagements. And what that means is we assume people are going to click the email, right? Do we need to test that? I mean, we already know what the percentage now is. It's like 40%, I think, maybe more people always click the email. We're going to get in that way if we have the time and patience. So often we'll assume that's been done and just start from an internal system that's been compromised. And maybe we'll coordinate with somebody internal and say, go ahead and run this payload or whatever. And what it lets us do is it lets us work with defense to see how their detection is working on this. You know, we can do different things internally faster without having to go through the process of doing the phishing email or the USB drops or whatever. And we do little drills also. Defense will talk to us and say, hey, could you do this kind of attack, or, you know, curb roasting or something? And we'll run a drill and do that for them. And they can tune their tools and their detection to, and we do purple team engagements. It's almost like looking over the shoulder of each other. You know, we're watching, do this. You know, and we're working more closely with them now to where we're even maybe going to work in the same room sometimes. And we'll do X, Y, and Z, and they'll actually be watching what we're doing as we're doing it.
So just kind of how this progressed. Like David mentioned, you know, we called ourselves Red Team in the beginning, but we started off really doing penetration testing, and that was our titles. From there, we kind of, we were doing vulnerability analysis to penetration testing, then to red teaming. And through the years, as that grew, we added engagement types. So 2 or 3 years ago, we weren't doing assume breach. 2 years ago, we weren't doing those dedicated drills. A couple years ago, we weren't really doing the purple team in one room getting things done. So as we've kind of grown and matured the red team organization, we've also tried to branch out and work with more and more teams. And that opens up the different types of engagements we can do so that we're now testing other parts of the organization as a whole and working with more of those teams to make sure they're getting the data they need.
Yeah, we've actually got partnerships with other companies, and we meet with their red teams on a regular basis too to work out. And everyone does things differently. I mean, I know there are companies that do like constant, drills all the time. There are other companies that will do like a red team engagement that lasts an entire year. It's interesting, how the dynamic there, and we learn a lot from these other teams as well. So I had a picture I was going to use. We weren't supposed to use it. So why is it needed? Well, again, I mentioned this already. The attackers, the adversaries are becoming more creative, more tenacious, and defense. And again, we're like an extension of defense. They want to know how better they can detect these types of attacks, how they can prevent them and block them. So we as a red team will do as much as we can to emulate these so that we're prepared in case the real attack comes, and that way defense can detect it and stop it. That's really what we're about. It's simulation of an attacker. Are there any questions, by the way, while we're going on? Feel free to ask questions as we're going, so because we're not sure the timing of the slides. We could go really short, and you guys got early, and Let me repeat that question. Yeah, so the question was, do we as a red team the vehicles as well as the systems? We actually have more than one team at General Motors. Within just General Motors proper, then there's like sister companies and stuff that we have other teams with. That there's like a product company team that does red teaming for the products, which is like the vehicle part of it. Now we work with them on engagements. We might like do something up to the vehicle or something like that, or we're learning more about the vehicles and hoping to be more involved in that part of it and work together with them. But it's a separate team that does that, though. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So the distinction is, if you had to sit in the vehicle, we have a product cybersecurity red team that handles those sort of attacks, and then anything leading up to the vehicle, if you think of it as a shell, that's where that falls into our domain, where we're looking at. Like I mentioned before, infrastructure, manufacturing, mobile, anything going into the vehicle from the outside, web apps, that falls under our scope.
And the environments are so intermeshed too that it's almost impossible not to get involved with the other groups. Because, for example, you look at I'll give an example. Like I know there are people here, like Chance, for example. He works at GM. He does like a lot of the mobile stuff. Well, it's not just the phone, because the mobile apps attach to APIs that are running on web servers. So that becomes more of an infrastructure issue at that point. And then you have APIs in the vehicles, and you have apps that work with the vehicles. And so it's too much intermingling, really, to just focus on one and not the others as well, or at least pull them in. So as we grow, we're becoming more and more collaborative on that. That's a very good question, by the way. Okay, here's an example. Just an attack flow. Forgive my artwork, by the way. It's kind of generic and boring looking. I get it. The red guys are red teams, just to make it easy. So this is one example, and this is a malicious file or media type of attack, where we are using a malicious, for example, a USB drive dropped somewhere, and you may see Mr. Robot where they just drop them in clumps, right? You drop them in piles. That's something. But no, you drop the drives, and people see them, and oh, who's this? What's this belong to? And they plug it into the system and hopefully run the file that's on them, or the macro, or whatever we're using, whatever method we're using. Or in a phishing example, a malicious attachment on an email. And as our defense grows more mature, these are becoming more and more difficult to pull off. You have to get more and more creative with them. So, how many remember the day when the auto run on Windows? Remember that? Old people, no. It was a great time for us, right? We just dropped something and it automatically runs, But you have to be a little more clever. And we have also, just to kind of point out, we have like a infrastructure as well, like our C2 command and control infrastructure, usually running in the cloud, so that when the victim executes the payload, we get a beacon back, a shell back to our infrastructure through because they're calling out over a port that's allowed outbound, like 443 or something, or what other ports, DNS maybe, possibly.
Right.
Cool. All right. Questions about that? Another type of is a physical type of attack. We do this occasionally where we'll go to a location and attempt to social engineer our way into the building. It's a lot easier than you think it would be or should be. And once we're in at that point, we can at this point place, we can do a lot of things. We can take a laptop with us and plug into the network, or bring brought a Raspberry Pi device. You could use one of these. Ever see Mr. Robot where you plugged it into the thermostat on the show? Raise your hands, remember that. Thank you. Something like that, something you can place and leave it there, and then come back and actually control it from the outside. Lots of things you can do once you have physical access. And some people say when you got physical access, the game is over pretty much, and that's really true. That's really true. All right. A logical perimeter breach would be, for example, finding a vulnerable web app or server on the outside. This isn't as common as it used to be. Obviously, this was the way to get into something. You'd find some server, some firewall rule that was left open. I'd even early in my career, I saw systems with SMB open on the outside, and I even found one it was a domain controller with external ports. All the ports open on domain controller were open on the outside. So not as common anymore, thanks to kind of default firewalling settings and such. But this is one way, possibly. A vulnerable web app would be an example. Finding something that you can get some kind of web shell on and then escalate privileges.
Yeah, I would just add, obviously this is a very generic, basic example. With cloud infrastructure and everything that's going on now, most companies don't have a typical perimeter like this anymore, and not everything's on the inside. But just trying to illustrate, one style of attack. But it does get more complicated. It's not like it used to be, like David said. Now you have all these moving pieces. You usually have a cloud architecture piece out there somewhere that's hooking into your internal system, and how do you traverse those networks?
And that brings up the issue like, AWS buckets, that sort of thing, that were,
Right.
GitHub repositories. There's all kinds of things where data is stored we might not even be aware of in our companies that are a pathway in to the environment. Any questions about these attack flows? And there are others. This is examples of some basic ones. There are probably some hybrid kinds of things we could talk about as well. And we don't stick to just one. And basically in a red team engagement, if we're able to actually get access very quickly, we'll try more than one, usually more than one type of approach too, to provide more value to our defense team and our company. Cool. You guys are very quiet. I had no candy to give you though if you ask questions, so it's going to be just, we have both technical skills and non-technical skills to talk about. Well, if you want to be in a red team or have a red team, what kind of skill sets you need to bring to those. We'll talk about those in detail. Next slides here. I think. There we go. Now, it's interesting. This is pen testing as well. Most people that start off in security in general are usually, what areas they come from? They come from development or IT. Are there any other areas that that you can think of that where you see a lot of people in security coming from besides those two areas? QA, okay. I would consider that part of like security but yeah, you're right. Auditing, for example, might be another area where legal, I don't know, maybe I've heard lawyers coming in and being good. Yes?
I started as a technical writer.
There you go. Yeah, this is just like a very broad couple of different, because we work with people that are both from a development standpoint and from an IT standpoint. And it's interesting working with developers. I'm not a developer. If you looked at my Python scripting, you might want to tear your eyes out. It's really messy. It's probably, 150 lines probably could be compressed down to 20 or something like that. But they think differently. You bring a different kind of mindset to the table when you're a developer. And it's good because sometimes we don't think like developers enough. And when developers come in and help us with our engagements, not only can they help us build infrastructure and find faster ways of doing that, but also just looking at problem solving and looking at the ways things are set up. But yeah, a wide variety of skills are brought into red teaming and useful. If you're good at social engineering, for example, that's a good skill. We'll talk about those in a minute. Hey, here we go. So these are just some random kind of skills that we found useful. I don't know so much about lockpicking. Is Jagor here? No. It's never come up for us yet. I think there are certain things in a red team engagement, like a physical one, that are kind of, yeah, you could do that, but does it really help that we do, like climbing fences and going through roof tiles and that sort of thing. You get hurt for one thing, and it doesn't really provide much value because what controls do you install to prevent that from happening? I guess you could put barbed wire.
Yeah, I guess like a modern lockpicking would be RFID, cloning, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of skills up here that we find useful. And I mentioned a couple like Cobalt Strike. It's what we use often for C2 infrastructure. Knowledge of operating systems. These are all really, really useful. And having a team that has a diverse set of skills is really useful because you can cross-train each other, for one thing, because we don't want one person on the team knowing everything about this and no one else knowing it. Like for example, one person knows how to set up infrastructure and no one else does. Well, he has a problem and no one can help him because, we're stopped at that point. But having more than one eyes on everything is kind of something we're moving more toward. Any questions about that? Any other skills you can think of that might be useful for? Yes?
Did you ever go dumpster diving at GM?
I'm trying to.
Really?
Not really. I'm trying to think. I think we've done some physical. We have done this. On a physical engagement, we did look through some of the bins inside the building for stuff. But,
Yeah, I think we've done that once
Yeah.
we physically gain access to a facility, looking for whatever you can, paperwork lying around. But I don't think either of us is actually physically
not
into a
a
dumpster.
GM. No.
You'll
No.
have to put that on your list.
Yeah. Is that a skill though? I guess having the intestinal fortitude to jump into a dumpster is a skill. Yeah. Because I've done that in the previous jobs before in GM, and you see the movies. You see the movie Hackers. It's all like sheets of paper. It's like, no, it's old sandwiches and coffee grounds, and there's nothing pleasant about dumpster diving. You want to wear gloves, and
I guess parkour, like if you're going to do that stuff, parkour is a skill set.
I often I was talking to somebody about once about sorry, it's a little diversion. I was talking to somebody about doing like skill sets and having and being able, for example, because people say, for example, well, you're a script kiddie if you do it this way. And I thought, really? Because if you think about it, if you're like a skilled diamond thief, right, and you see a museum and you're planning for months to get in the museum, and you got your grappling hook, and you learn to do like the parkour moves through the laser beam, like in the movies they do the thing with it. I'm old, I'll break my back. And you got the glass cutter to cut the perfect circle of glass. You're going to scale up the building, and you get the suction cups to get up in the vent. And you get to the museum on the night of your project, and the door's left open. And the diamond's right there. The guard's asleep, and the diamond's right there. They were out cleaning it, and he fell asleep. Are you a lesser thief because you're going to go in and grab it? I mean, are you a script kiddie because you're going to use simple methods that are available to you? So, never think like it has to be really sexy and elaborate to win. You look for the simple stuff. It's something sometimes, dumpster diving is a good example of that. Someone put a password on a piece of paper and left it on their monitor, for example. Sometimes it's the easy things we overlook because we're looking at the more, elaborate things we can brag about. So, all right. Questions any more questions? It's a good question, by the way. So training. I'm going to get probably some teasing and leering because we put CEH up there. Is a certification, and I know it's like one of those things that's like really, really. I mean, people make fun of it. Let's make fun. I honestly, if you look at the book for CEH, it's not bad. It really isn't bad information to know. It's not a bad set of knowledge to have. I wouldn't make fun of anyone who went after that as long as that wasn't like their end goal, and they weren't claiming to be an elite hacker because they had a CEH. That's my only thing. But yeah, there are other things up there too. SANS, OSCP is a good one. It's very hands-on. SpectreOps is a training that company offers. It's really probably one of the most respected training for red teamers. There's other things you can do kind of on your own. CTF competitions, Hack the Box, Vuln Hub. Anything else, Johnny?
Yeah, just that it's all relative, right? So
Yeah.
somebody that may be brand new to security might find CEH very helpful, right? It gives you the terminology, it gives you the organizational layout of how security operates.
Yep.
But yeah, you're not going to be elite or anything. So I think it's all relative
Yeah.
when you're looking at formal and informal training on where your skill set is and trying to figure out what will get you to the next level.
Yeah.
And we try to include just a lot of, we're not specifically advertising the formal
Yeah.
training. We're just trying to give an example of each skill level of what's out there. There's obviously a lot more,
Yeah.
a lot of different certs. And then informal training, A lot of those are like Hack the Box that it's free and good and can get you started.
Anybody
through the door.
Anybody not know Hack the Box or have used it before? Anybody here that not seen that before? Yeah, it's basically like the OSCP labs. You're given an environment where you basically VPN into these systems and you try to break into them. Windows boxes, Linux boxes, they're usually up to date with current types of vulnerabilities too. It's not like you're going to find ping of death or or something like that. These are like current things that are happening that they build, and it's free. And if you're preparing for like the OSCP, it's a really good way of getting in and getting your feet wet for free before you start buying lab time. So.
Yeah, and personally, I got a lot out of blogs. A lot of people will just create their own sites that are either on GitHub or some rough blog post. And if you get a good collection of those together, we'll try to give you a couple of examples. It's always a good reference point because you'll start to see people are very strong in one area, and you collect enough of those, you kind of get a good round of training just by seeing what other people are learning and observing.
IPSec, by the way, I really recommend that. What he does is, it's a YouTube channel. What he does is he goes to these boxes in the Hack the Box. If they retire, they don't want you to do walkthroughs of the current boxes, but when they retire them, he'll go through and do walkthroughs of them for anyone who wants to watch it. And they're really informative. Watching this guy get into the box and watching the way his mind works, and he'll try more than one way of doing more than one vulnerability. You learn a ton of stuff. You'll take tons of notes watching his stuff. I learned that's a good point too, because he's going to talk about soft skills. I went to we had a study group here in Austin for OWASP, and we did a remedial, like a very, very beginner, basic, low-level Kali Linux training we picked that book. And I was like, do I need to do that? It's like really basic, and I know all the basics. I'm not going to learn anything from this. I was so wrong how much I learned from this basic stuff, because there are things I was doing that I could have done so much easier doing it this way. Yeah, we're talking about the attitude of never always learning, but there's so many resources out there now that are available to you that weren't available to me when I started out. So, any questions about these, or anybody have any other quick? Yes.
Why is CISSP on this list?
Why? That's a good question. For red teaming, because we think it's a very, very basic, very, very good starting point for just, if you're, let's say, news security, I guess, right? It's like a foundational kind of thing, right? So I would say, I guess the question is, if you're interviewing for a job and you're interviewing for a red team position, I could see them asking you, why don't you have a CISSP yet?
I think also it adds, so it's shallow but broad, right, is how it's typically. There's a lot of things in there that aren't going to be technical, but you're still going to use. One example is the risk. So understanding the risk in an organization, different ways to calculate that risk. You're going to use that when you find a vulnerability and have to categorize it.
And report on it, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
So it's not a bad...
That's true.
It gets you past the HR filter. It also does have a physical piece where you kind of learn about different gauges of fencing and how to secure a building, and each little section kind of has a little nugget that could be applicable. So I think it's worth being on this list, but it's not something that I would compare to like an OSCP or something from SANS where it's going to technical deep dive and give you the hands-on knowledge to do some of these exploits.
Plus, you're having to communicate with other security groups within your organization as well. You have to have some kind of foundational, knowing the terminology, we'll talk about that, but knowing the terminology is important. So if you don't know the terminology behind threat, behind risk, you're going to have very difficult reporting on that, reporting out to the C-level administrators, executives on this. You got a question?
What's the interview process like?
Hours?
In general, from our experience?
I think he wants GMs. What's GMs?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll let you take that.
Me? Oh, dang.
No, I can start it. So, obviously we post all of our openings on the official website. And here, at LastCon, we have an opening right now on the whiteboard with our names on it. If you're interested, just at a high level, we're looking for a lead penetration tester. But the interview process, I think, is pretty standard from my experience at a few different companies. We're here today, right now, and you can obviously talk to us after this talk and reach out to us and we can give you some more information, but pretty much apply through the site. We do an technical interview in the beginning where we look at technical skills, but also have those soft skills, and then from there move on to an on-site, et cetera. So pretty standard. I can go into more detail if anybody's interested after this.
Yeah. And I think
high level.
also it's important to note that attitude and soft skills, being able to work with people, is as much, if not more important to us than even the technical part of it.
Yeah, I think the keynote mentioned that
Yeah.
yesterday,
Yeah, yeah.
how finding vulnerabilities is great, but if you don't have some of those communication skills and collaboration skills, getting those vulnerabilities fixed is going to be a lot harder.
What's the use of having 15 certs after your name if no one wants to work with you? Well, I don't know how much we can go into that.
Well, obviously,
yeah.
we try to stay high level.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think we've divulged any secrets or anything here.
I have to delete the next slide, though.
People are going to try to fish organizations. People are going to try to gain access,
Yeah.
through web apps. So we keep it high level, but also try to give real-world examples of what could be used. So when we showed the physical, all of those are real-world examples of what's
Yeah.
going on. You can look it up in the news. If you use the example of exploiting a web server and then getting into the network, that's a viable threat that every organization faces. So we're not, we try to keep it high level, not say specific things about specific applications that may have vulnerabilities, but just try to give you overall idea of the workflow.
Things that can apply to any company, really.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Our company is a 100-year-old company, and the culture is often 100 years old. But but no, seriously. I mean, every company that's old is like that. But we're coming at we're getting more involved in the security community now. We're working to share more with people, and
Yeah, I think just our group alone has done maybe 5 or 6 in
Yeah.
the last couple of years. They're just the red
Yeah.
team around different conferences
Yeah.
in the U.S.
yeah. And the legal part is letting us change the format a little bit and have fun with that a little bit. So they're loosening up. So
Yeah, we don't have any memes,
Yeah, no memes.
unfortunately. That's one side effect.
Yeah.
But we try to keep it interesting with visuals
Yeah.
that actually David created, so if you guys like these visuals.
if you like my graphics,
Yeah.
I do some stuff on the side as for fun, but not so much for profit, unfortunately. Anybody remember like the old? There was like the CDs that came out with that were. Gosh, I can't think of the name of them now. It's like VulnHub, but this guy was the first one to do this. You released these CDs that were vulnerable systems, and you booted your box up to this box, and it loaded a vulnerable server. And as I was hearing an interview of his, it was funny because he said that he keeps seeing people calling him, asking him, "Okay, I booted the box up. Now what's the password?" And the guy said, "Well, you don't understand. You have to figure out what the password is." "Yeah, but I got to get in. What's the password?" It was like a vicious circle. You don't know. You have to hack into it to get the password. "Yeah, but I can't log into it." "I know. Yeah, VulnHub is very similar to that. Pentester Labs, Pentester Academy, those are paid services you can go to, and they're mostly web app related services. They're really good though. Okay, soft skills. I'm gonna let Johnny lead this part, and I'll chime in when.
Sure, yeah. So like we mentioned, there's 2 sides of the coin. You got to have the technical skills to find vulnerabilities, exploit them, get the data. Then you got to have the soft skills to really drive and make those changes within the organization and present all of the findings and how critical they are, and get that point across. So an important one is communication. There's internal communication, within your team, and then external communication as well. So when we're running an operation for internal communication within our team, we try to make sure our channels are secure. Some of that OPSEC stuff, end-to-end encryption, making sure we're not leaking any information within our project. We're actually, taking the precautions we should to secure the information we're sharing. And then within our team, organization of clear task of who's doing what. So if you get a shell back, who's taking that shell? What are they doing with it? Is persistence key, or is exfiltration their number one step? And just trying to keep track, stay organized. There's things like Jira and Microsoft Tasks and a million other ones. Really just making sure everybody has something to do and knows what should be done, so you can keep going on to that goal. And then establishing a common language is, for example, defense, like blue team or intelligence. One example there is some people say payloads, some people say malware, some people say implants. And when you're in the heat of a project, it's very important that you're all speaking the same language, so that if some deconfliction needs to take place of, is this a real actor, is this you guys? When they say a term, you're all in the same level field. You understand what they're saying, they understand what you're saying. And then just kind of listed a couple of high-level frameworks to take care of that. MITRE is very good about types within that cycle of this is persistence, and here are a few actions you can be taken within that. Here's how you gain access. And then the kill chain, which is older now, has been replaced by MITRE. That was a little more high level than MITRE, but followed a lot of the same buckets of categorization. So there's just two examples of how to make sure that within your organization, you are communicating and saying the same thing so it doesn't get lost in translation.
Also, too, communication with executives is very important to kind of understand how that works, because you don't speak to executives the same way you speak to like Blue Team or your teammates. We had to learn early on, like in reporting, to stop using words like password dump or password crack. Here's a good rule of thumb. Any word that you use that would make any 9-year-olds in the room giggle, probably need to change those words to something else a little more professional. So, but yeah, less technical too. I mean, they don't really care when you're doing an executive report. You don't really care about the getting in the weeds. They want to know the risk, what happened, and very basic language. Not that they're stupid or anything, just because that's all they care about, right? They don't want to know about the.
Yeah, instead of saying dump, maybe you can say extracted,
Extraction,
or
yeah.
you know.
We had trouble also. I mean, how many of you, as a penetration tester, have trouble explaining to people what you do for a living because just what it's called, right? I mean, it's really kind of an awkward thing to call. You know, you say, well, I'm an ethical hacker. That brings up all the questions. So I'm in security. That's all I say. You know, I've given up trying to explain. You know.
And then collaboration. So that communication kind of ties into the collaboration. Collaboration is more keeping that communication ongoing and making sure that all of those different teams, those moving parts that ultimately have the same goal of making the organization more secure and better, that you guys are always on the same page, always communicating. With example with defense, when we do purple team engagements, that's constant and quick feedback where we can do something during that purple team. Blue team will say, okay, we saw this or we didn't see this. And that's one example of collaboration. And then intelligence is they have an organization where they're collecting all that information that we can then use in our operations. So if they know a specific threat actor is targeting X type of company in this region, well, that's useful information to us because we want to make sure that we are testing those types of attacks and that we are giving blue team or defense the right view there. And then security architecture, as another example, takes an example of maybe not during the attack, but before and the enterprise level, how can we identify these things so that they don't become a vulnerability down the line that we find, right? So just a few examples of how working together within the organization can stop vulnerabilities from coming out before they happen, and then once they are out, identifying them and quickly taking action on them, whether that be through like detect or prevent measures. So organization. This is one of the major things when you're doing these testing, whether it's penetration testing or red teaming specifically, is you want to have timestamps for everything. You want to be able to provide as much data as possible to the teams that are going to need it for the follow-up. So if you said you did this style of attack, they're going to want to know when did you do it, what did you do it against, what was your source IP, what was your destination, what port did you use, what service, what was the version of that service. All the data you collect is very important and can be later used to fix problems or identify what was happening. But with that, you have to be very organized at your team and individual level to understand that you're going to have all that data available when they need it. So how do you stay organized at the individual level? Some people use like Cherry Tree and Kali. Some people use OneNote, Evernote. There's a lot of different ways. Some people do PCAPs of all the network data going across. It's important to just kind of standardize that within yourself and within your team so that you're all on the same page of the type of data that's needed.
Another thing that bit us behind in the earlier years was the fact that we would say, okay, we did this at 12 p.m. Is that Eastern or Central? Because half our team's in Eastern, So agreeing on, for example, like using all UTC for everything we do is something we had to agree on. That way we're not having any kind of confusion there with regards to when this actually happened.
Yeah, so we had team members in different countries doing different things, and then we agreed on
Yeah.
time frames to use for those within our team. But then when we passed it off to another team, they were using another time zone and UTC reference, so we had to
People
standardize
looking
that.
for logs for that time for like hours. They can't find anything for that. Oh, it's because it was 3 hours this way. So. Yeah.
Right, and then just with all that data you're collecting, you're going to start thinking about what type of metrics you're going to use to measure these things. We'll touch on metrics a little more. So let's say you've done the project, you found some cool things, you did some exploits, you feel elite. You got to turn everything you use from the technical into kind of what everybody else uses on the day-to-day. PowerPoint or a Word document, some sort of report that's going to get to either the business owners that are dealing with those applications or the executives that have to make these changes on enterprise-wide. So you've got to figure out a way of how you're going to communicate those and how you're going to translate command shell screenshots or command line things into a presentable way that'll keep executives engaged and interested and understand the impact of what you've done.
It is the least fun part of this.
Right.
and so find some good music to listen to while you're doing it.
Yeah, this one can be tedious because
Yeah.
it's not as fun as exploiting and popping all the things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there was metrics there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you delegate the writing piece of it? Do you have people?
I wish. No.
Well, no, actually,
Willing to do it?
actually, here's the thing. We when we have new people on the team, we will often delegate them to do the report. And then I remember one poor guy we put through the ringer because Johnny's really good with like formatting. I'm pretty good with wording, wordsmithing. And so between the two, we made him rewrite this thing probably 12 times.
Yeah, that was bad. That was his first.
It was rough. It was rough. And then we went to our manager who wanted the
bad
whole thing
for us,
rewritten.
not for the guy.
I mean, but yeah, that's a good point too. In that when we write reports, we try to do team peer reviews as much as possible. I'll send it to Johnny. Johnny will send it to another guy, and then we'll circulate, and we'll have a common meeting where we talk about the differences in opinions or whatever, and we'll come out. But even then, we do that. They go to like upper management, like, oh no, scrap this whole thing, and
Yeah, so if you look at the type of reports, that's
Yeah.
kind of what our target audience is, right? So we have a target audience that needs the technical report, let's say defense, where they need the exact command run at the exact time with the source IP. Great, we make a report for them so that they can have all their answers there. And then we make executive reports where they need to know just high level what were the big findings and then how can they address them.
Yep.
And then we typically map attack flows in as a visual representation like we showed earlier, so that even non-technical people can understand step 1, step 2, step 3 visually, on like a Visio diagram and understand, oh, okay, that led to this, got it. And then metrics are just, how we quantify and how we help the organizations determine if they're getting better. What was our mean time to compromise, mean time to detect, how long were we in the network or the system before a flag went off? Was it better than last year or last month? And then successful versus failed attempts. Failed attempts are often just as good as successful attempts as far as a data point, because failed attempts means maybe something did work and stopped it, and something was triggered and was blocked, right? But successful is the sexy stuff where it's like, oh, it worked and I got in and got access. Right, and then just kind of the overflow of trying to fix the problem, which is the most difficult part, I think. It's very easy to find vulnerabilities and exploit them, but getting them fixed is probably what takes forever, right? So you make the report, you found it, you get it to the right people, and then usually it's not just a switch, like, oh, I'm going to click this and everything gets fixed. It's a long process of either changing configurations or updating versions or seeing some interconnections that weren't there before. So we got that cycle of, you discover, you report, you prioritize based on risk, and then you try to remediate and retest. So if the business owner remediated this one problem, when we have to go back, re-engage, and retest and make sure, yep, that's not vulnerable anymore, we're good to go, we can close out the issue. But this, I think, is what takes most of the time. It's not always just popping boxes. It's trying to figure out within the organization, the best way to secure these things and fix the problem. Yeah, I think, like we said, for our organization, we don't handle inside of the car, so we probably don't have the best answer for you on that. We take care of everything leading into the vehicle. That would probably be the product red team would have a better answer for you.
There's probably different lead times, I'm sure, because
Right.
if you find a vulnerability in a car and they're all on the highway, if it's a bad enough vulnerability, you have like a recall or something, right? I mean, you have to do something, or maybe there's a way of downloading the software.
So yeah, GM does do over-the-air updates
Yeah.
for certain vehicles, and there's that technology that's coming about. I don't know all the specifics of it. And there's also, GM has a bug bounty program through HackerOne for identifying any of those issues. So if you do identify that and you want to report it, HackerOne, General Motors, they have something there for vehicles as well as infrastructure side.
One clear difference between like our company and a lot of other companies that deal with security, it has to do with safety, right? I mean, if something goes wrong, there's a software bug or even car could veer off the road and kill somebody. So it's obviously going to be obviously a different kind of with a car type of vulnerability that would affect its it's going to be probably a much more critical short lead time to get it fixed, I'm sure. But
Yep, we've got 5 minutes left, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to breeze through this.
Sorry.
Last couple things. So career growth is just kind of some what we've learned as we're going through, and obviously we're still learning, and that's kind of the most important part, which our next slide is in this field, cybersecurity in general, whether it's application or red teaming, it's just continuous learning. So take initiative where you can, offer to help others, and then if there is feedback, actively seek it. What can I do better? Whether that's in the soft skills or technical skills. Attend conferences like
Yep.
this and try to learn a new thing. I was learning a lot about mobile app security yesterday, or was that today's talk? That was interesting. There's a lot of study groups, even here in Austin locally, that you can get involved in and just kind of dive into a different area. And then, build your brand as the typical, what do you want to do? How do you see yourself? If you want to be a red teamer, maybe you can start putting out some blog posts about what you've identified in recent vulnerabilities or exploits you've done or bug hunting, etc. I think our last slide, second to last slide, is just bonus points, which is, the InfoSec community is huge. If you want to do this sort of thing, there's plenty of outlets for you to get your feet wet in that sort of thing. There's conferences like this where you can do the CTF or you can do the lockpicking and get some experience there and see if that's something you like. There's everybody here at the conference that you can network with and ask them, what is your day-to-day like?
I can't speak for every city, but this city, if you're in security, you can never use the excuse there's nothing to do to learn more. That's never an excuse here. There's always things going on. There's always groups meeting. There's always things like this. We have a study group every Thursday for OWASP. We meet at National Instruments every Thursday. Right now we were working on the badge challenge stuff, and I'm not sure what we're going to do after this is over, but that's something else you get involved in. So there's other groups. There's ISSA, there's ISACA, there's 2600, I think. There's a lot of other groups in town to get involved with. So.
Yep. So overall, multiple paths to red teaming, if that's what you want to get into. And we have some opportunities at General Motors that we'd be happy to talk to you about after this, if anybody's interested. You need a wide range of technical, but also some of those soft skills where you can drive and get things done. And then just get involved in things like this. Like this conference, you're already here. And just don't ever stop being a student. There's always a new area to learn. There's always new technology coming out,
Yep.
and it's never ending, which is good. It makes it fun, I think.
If you guys have any questions, we're kind of out of time, but you can find us out in the hall or whatever. If you have further questions about the job we're offering or red teaming in general, please feel free to talk to us.
Yeah, and thank you for coming.